This is Accessing the Pipeline, a podcast for Black professionals in private equity and finance, brought to you by McGuireWoods. Each episode features special guests offering insights into accessing capital, developing and expanding relationships, opportunities, and driving growth for Black-owned businesses. Tune in to access the possibilities.
Welcome to a new episode of Accessing the Pipeline. My name is Abdul, Lediju, and I'm a partner in the corporate and private equity department at McGuireWoods, where I advise sponsors and investors in fund formation and investment management matters. Please join me and my fellow McGuireWoods partner, Dan Howell, in welcoming to the podcast Ernie Lyles of the HiGro Group. Welcome.
Thank you.
Before we get started, I want to give my co-host a moment to introduce himself and his practice.
Thanks, Abdul, and good afternoon to Ernie and our listeners. My name is Dan Howell. I'm a partner here at McGuireWoods, focused on M&A and private equity transactions. We're really excited to have you on, Ernie, and looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks, man. I'm excited too. Let's go.
Absolutely. Well, Ernie, let's start. You've had an incredible journey. I've been lucky and I've had the chance to witness a lot of the professional innings firsthand.
Yeah.
As your law school classmate. Can you give our listeners a bit of a view, a comprehensive, picture into your background or snapshot into your background and how you arrived at where you are today?
Yes. How deep you want me to go? You want me to go pre-law school, law school, banking? We can go way back.
As the whole journey.
The whole. Well,
it's all fascinating.
No. Well, I try to weave in a few themes, because maybe what'll happen is as we talk about, sort of advice or things during the conversation, people can understand the context for which I come from. Or definitely a unique journey relative to a number of the folks that get to sit on, 6th Avenue, 33rd floor, McGuireWoods, or whatever floor we're on. Wasn't meant to be that way, but I think I've been very blessed and excited that it has been that. I actually grew up in West Virginia, believe it or not, which is quite exotic as a guy from who every time I meet somebody here in New York or Harlem, I'm like, no, I'm actually from West Virginia. Like, what? Like, you always talking about?
Yeah.
And but I grew up in an incredible town, small town called Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Shout out to that lovely, beautiful place. And even that sort of rural area, that was shaped by my parents both being from the DC area. So my mom is from Arlington, Virginia, a great suburb of DC. And then my dad is actually from the other side of the tracks in Southeast, Anacostia, which I take quite a lot of pride in as well. And, I think they decided when I was 4, he being a minister, that they would take the first leap of faith and to actually moved to this town called Shepherdstown in West Virginia, old DC boy, and raise their kids there and build a great ministry. And so what actually looked like, kind of a 2 or 3 year stint turned out to be about 20 years there. Huh. And that was the foundation for a number of the ways I think and do things. So went to undergrad there, same town, Shepherd University. And, at the time, I think I had always saw myself in one way, but I was just trying to realize that there wasn't a lot of models, if you will. And certainly from a Wall Street perspective, I think, all I knew was that, the end of, the news that my dad watched, it'd be this bell ringing or what have you. And they'd be like, oh, like, what is that? Like, but there wasn't a lot of models. Having said that, I read a lot, even in my spare time. And, I just knew I just wanted to be bigger. And even though it was small town, there was something there. And I think, shout out to the community that sometimes when you surround yourself with people, they kind of see where you're supposed to be even before you do it. So I always had that encouragement as well, whether it was my teachers, a couple of teachers, my church members, all of that stuff. And it was enough to drive me to say, okay, what is the next thing? Abdul, you'll really appreciate this, is that I remember watching the news and, I was just looking at the news, and I'm like, this is right around the time of, I guess it was, early 2000s or late 90s. And I see this like Black man who's on the golf course just hanging out with the president. And I'm like, who is that? Like, how does that happen? and never really met him, but it was just a model. The model in itself, and a giant, which I learned later on was Vernon Jordan. Started reading his book, and like, how do I model that? Like, what is that, right? This person must have influence, must be out here making impact. And one of the things he did was looked at you becoming a lawyer. And so I sort of did a list of people I admired. What was this thing, and especially being close to DC, government, this intersection of government, business. And I said, this is probably the right path. And, I went in, did my applications, and I was very fortunate to go to the Hustle, Howard University School of Law, which we both take incredible pride in. And, the whole blueprint at the time, a lot of folks were, very focused on, getting into big law or, working at the DA's office or, public interest. And for me, it was really about, just having opportunity. And particularly, as I thought about opportunity, it was really about, being in business and, trying to really make an impact. But I wasn't quite sure. I knew I was like the law itself. I wanted a degree, but I didn't really want to see myself like standing in front of a judge or anything. That just wasn't it. And so, I was also just very entrepreneurial. And so, our first year when you have this kind of first year summer where you determine like, where do you go? And you're seeing all these people doing these interviews and everything else. It's like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And at the time I was in DC and, I'll give out some big shout outs, but I saw someone who I admired, again, from afar, didn't know them, didn't really have the network, that kind of stuff at the time. But it was a congressman. He's a former quarterback named J.C. Watts, former Oklahoma quarterback, right? J.C. Option, triple threat kind of guy. And I mean, man, at that time, his star was so bright. Yep. And he was just leaving Congress. And, he was very tight to the president and all these different things. And, I had found out that he was doing this thing called sort of public affairs and some other stuff. I said, well, this is the way I'm going to like see the world. Like, I just got to see how this moves. And, I called him and I said, just called back then, you could just like find numbers. I don't know how I found it, but found it.
It's impressive that you
and I was like, I'm looking for an internship. And they're like, nah, we're good. I was like, I'm Ernie Lyles. It's the third or fourth time. And I was like, I don't think you guys understand. Like, I'm trying to work for free. And they're like, oh, like, why didn't you say that? What are you doing? You know what I mean? Like come on over. So, and so that was my, first year summer. And I would tell you, man, it was like, everything that I had like wanted in terms of exposure, it was all on that floor in that office. I mean, they were public affairs. They were advising governments on certain things. JC himself was an incredible entrepreneur. He had his own businesses and everything else. And then they were doing this thing. They were trying to create what they call this private equity firm. And I was like, oh, like this is really interesting. And this is why, I think, depending on who listens to this, especially as a younger person, for some reason, I just kind of always knew that like people always had their like eye, in these organizations or in your office or whatever. And so I found a way. There's a gentleman who they had recruited from an investment bank, and, he was there to help JC, a guy named Joe Kreider, build this private equity firm. Mm-hmm. And so, I would kind of get like, they throw me some legal work. I was like, all right, let me just do this, they throw me other stuff, and then like when I was like creeping into Joe's, hey, what are you working on? And then he'd like, give me a little piece and like give me a little piece of research. I go home and devour it. Oh, like, what are you reading? Oh, I devour it. Then I'd do work and it'd be like extra. And then I'd like, I intentionally would send emails out like 1 a.m. And because they were like, like, what is this dude doing?
Trying to show the hustle. Yeah.
Trying to show the hustle, right? What are you doing? Like, and so I knew that if I showed the hustle, at least by the end, they would like owe me something. Like I'm making money, but like, you got to do me something. So crazy story, but at the end of the internship, and that's why I'll be very specific, simply because I owe all of these people along the way so much because they were just taking bets, right? And so at the end, on my internship, I sat with Joe, and, he's a great guy. Hopefully he gets to hear this. But we sat down and was like, I like all this law stuff. I do all this other stuff. I love working with a great brother named Darren Carrington, all this stuff, Airway Sailor, great guys. But I really want to just figure out this like finances, this banking thing. And so Joe is like, all right, like, let me do this favor kind of thing. And I'm just spilling all the tea here or whatever. So he's, I think he at least owed me that. He sends out an email to this guy, and, I'll just say his name's Anthony Brown, here in New York. And he's like, hey, I got a great kid. He ended his internship, blah, blah, blah. And, because I think, sort of being a little street smart, I make sure he like copies, another sort of official, if you will, right? So it gets, this guy, Anthony's attention, who was working at the firm at the time as well. So I'm like, okay, like, here's the sort of chess pieces that are going.
Sure.
But I'm also like, Joe, like, tag, Anthony Brown, like, this is like a little analyst kind of thing. Like that's what I got for the summer. Like, but, but he sends an email, and Anthony responds back. It's like, oh, Joe, great to meet you. Or, Ernie, great to meet you. Joe, awesome. Ernie, to the extent you're in New York, let's grab a cup of coffee kind of thing, right? Yeah. So I'm like, oh, awesome. Just so happens that I'll be in New York next week, and I'm looking at that time, right? Like my student loan money hadn't come in. I think I had like $138, and like the Amtrak was like 94. You know what I mean? And I was like, let me take this like $94, got my little butt on a train, come up. And it's really important. I always, say that I, just sort of show my gratitude. I come up, have no idea what I'm doing. I'm on 48th and Park, right next to the Waldorf. Like first time in one of these big, massive buildings. Yeah. And, I'll never forget, man, I'm like, doing all this studying, but I have like no finance classes or anything like that. And I, sort of come in, I'm all ready to meet this like analyst or whatever, and, kind of like try to figure out how to navigate this whole system and giving it a shot, rolling the dice. In comes this guy who he's going to kill me, but ends up looking like George Costanza. The first time I saw, I'm like, Anthony Brown. Like, I'm thinking the name, and we still laugh at this. Like, this ain't Anthony. The kind of Anthony Brown I know is bad. Yeah. And we sit down, man, and I tell you, we sit for like 3 hours. Wow. And, he's walking me through banking. He's showing me the pyramid. And a lot of stuff I'd already read and stuff, but like just to like sort of really hear someone. And we're going back and forth, and he's the most like genuine, funny, charismatic, direct, all of these different things, and pointed, person that I had spoken to related to finance ever. And so we have this conversation, and at the end I'm like, so I really want to do this, and, I really want to get a shot at, becoming, a summer associate. So he's like, yeah, and I won't say the founder, the sort of head of banking's name at the time, but it's like he believes in being entrepreneurial, and we're going to figure out if we can figure something out, or you can come back up in December. And I'm like I said, I'm probably sharing too much, but I said, okay. I said, but you gotta understand, like, I have to have a job. It's the only way. Like, I've done the math. Like, I need to have a summer job for next year, and the only way that I can do that right now is people are recruiting like right now for law firms, right? You go back to school, you recruit. And so he goes, yeah, I think we can think outside the box a little bit and bring you up. And, I walk out and I'm just like lit, like, oh, snap. Like, dude, you are like actually this is about to get really real. So like, I'm trying to like still play it cool. And, I'm on my way walking out, and I'm shaking hands. I'm like, oh, by the way, because this is pre-Google, right? This is pre-LinkedIn. So what do you do? Like, who are you? And he's like, oh, I kind of run HR here. I was like, whoa, what? It was crazy. Amazing. So 3 straight hours of that.
Wow.
Study my butt off, come up, do all the interviews. I still don't know how I did it, but, long story to sort of say that was the beginning of my Wall Street experience, got the offer. And, that was the path to coming on Wall Street, worked at a firm, UBS, which was at an incredible time to join banking. Some of the most talented, the most driven, most demanding professionals, especially at that time period from 2005 to about 2015. I worked there, and particularly the early years, it was incredible for someone who was junior to learn from, or someone who's junior to learn at, I should say. So that was the beginning. Abdul, as in law school, so I had that 1 year as a, sort of prepping for that, took classes in different places. Howell was incredibly accommodating. And 10 years of banking. And then really got to the point where, I think you heard this story kind of sounds very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And, it's got to the point where, one of my good colleagues like to say that the politics can outrun the talent at times. And, quite frankly, I feel like I'm very talented, right? And I had seen that happen, that playbook over and over again through, the GFC, through all these different things, through these different moves, and groups and everything else. And I was like, my daughter was, I think, 2 at the time. I laugh and joke every time I talk to people. I got the biggest negotiation one of my life, which was with my wife. And she basically gave me a 2-year put option to do, to do everything that I've been complaining about every night, whatever, when I come home, dude, this has been a discussion from 2005, which I'll talk about my partner, business partner, Vikram, in a little bit, where y'all been talking about this for literally 10 years and you have done anything. And so, really got the courage in 2016 to make the jump. And really to do what I like, or call it, bring Wall Street to Main Street. And, what that meant really was to find businesses that look like the ones I grew up in West Virginia, where, we're no longer in these big, massive conference centers and everything's processed. And instead, if I could find some really good leaders who needed to make certain decisions, right? Whether they were transitioning, whether they were trying to, find liquidity, where they were trying to figure out ways to grow that they just didn't have access to through capital or connections or anything. If I could come in and take everything I had learned from Wall Street and then bring that to them, then, particularly given the size and the place where they were, there could just be some real alpha. So it was an incredible journey, for the last, call it, which is crazy to say, because, you step out on faith and you're like, oh, but it's been 10 years.
10 years. Yeah.
10 years. And, since that 10 years, we've bought 5 platforms, 3 are private, 2 are public, 1 we've exited. Each of those businesses have always done add-ons. So I think in total, we've done about 15 or 20 acquisitions. And, now I get to work with my best friend, because I finally got my 10-year recruiting effort of bring it over Vikram. We used to literally sit right next to each other.
That's amazing.
In banking.
That's awesome.
So if I was at church, somebody say God is good, it's all the time. But yeah, man, it's been great. So, as Nipsey likes to say, the marathon continues, but that's been the journey.
Amazing.
Cool. Yeah. So hopefully that was, fast or quick, but that was sort of the, I guess it was more than 2-minute sort of background.
It's a great summary, though, kind of how you, because someone sees your resume, Howard Law, and now you're doing this.
Yeah.
Kind of, not the typical path, but a very interesting one. And so, it sounds like, it's been almost 10 years at HiGro. You said 20 deals, very impressive.
Yeah.
I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into, when you're looking at a deal, under the HiGro umbrella, what are the common ingredients that you're looking for? What are some things that, that if you're analyzing potential deals that you're looking for that makes something attractive to your firm? And then, we can kind of follow up with that to maybe talk through some examples of some transactions that stood out during this past decade.
Yeah, gee, man, you went M&A lawyers right into the deal. I'm like, let's talk about me, man. Yeah, goodness gracious.
So it's reflective of you.
Yeah. But we try to, and if Vic was here, he would, sort of talk about this what we call the call R cube. So, in our weekly call, we really are just you filter through a lot, just get a bunch of stuff sent to us. We certainly focus on, I was head of tech and business services at UBS before I left. So that's my sort of industry background, Vic. So, with that, I was head of tech and business services at UBS. Vic has always been sort of a software banker. Shout out to him. He's done what now is the second largest software M&A deal ever, having done IBM and Red Hat. So super sophisticated in that space. Always like to embarrass him with that stat, especially being second now as opposed to first, the largest or whatever. But beyond sort of the where does it fit in our expertise, like those are pretty standard stuff that everybody likes to or has to do, really, so you can bring sort of your own sort of underwriting hat to it. But big picture, we really just say like our cube, and I really like this, it really is is this the right deal, right? Are we the right buyer, right? And is this the right fit? So right deal really means like, what are the actual like circumstances, right? Like, so if you think about the company, what's actually happening with the company in a way that it's healthy, it's not a mess, that kind of thing, are the fundamentals there? What is the like sort of recurring revenue or the margins, all of that stuff that is like pretty standard, right company kind of thing. The real thing though is, which I like a lot really, right, is sort of the right buyer perspective, right? So even when you have like the right company per se, right, like, the real question, if we are the right buyer, we'll know it. In other words, like, what will we do, sort of pre and post that makes a difference? Is there someone in our network that we can call that, understands the business, like just overall of the sector? Is there someone that, or some sort of plan that we've seen before that we can say, well, this is how we adjust, this is how we tweak, this is what we're going to do really once we own it. A lot of people, now, especially now, it's like, oh, here's our value creation plan. But you can be inappropriately positioned in a way that your playbook just doesn't work. Right. But, and Abdul, I'll talk about the one that, we just did, right? Like, we bought a hotel linen laundry business, call it 6 months ago or something like that. New York's largest, right? And, when we first got introduced to the sellers, it wasn't like I was like thinking about, hotel linen laundry, right? You know what I mean? Before that, like, they're like, what? You know what I mean? But as we started like digging in, one is we understood like, the seller's motivation. It just so happened from an underwriting perspective that one of my boys who, was in our first year associate class happened to have been the head of M&A for like the largest provider over time, right, in that space, right? So that you imagine the knowledge share. We went from like 0 to 100 in terms of just like, are we the right buyer? And that alone, right? All of a sudden now we're just smarter. And he happened to have looked at that company years before. The other one is particularly as we set up our capital structure, we don't have committed capital, right? So we curate, if you will, our investor base. And so the awesome thing is that, when we curated this group, we were able to bring in, which is incredible brother, Ben Carson and the Fulcrum team and Ben Carson Jr. And, they had actually built the largest hospitality parking management company, like one of the largest in the country, from scratch. And so you can imagine the expertise, the familiarity, the synergies, right? We put certain people on the board, blah, blah, blah. So all of a sudden we just became like, not the right buyer, but like the buyer, right? You know what I mean? And, lastly, I think we talked about the right fit, using that one as an example is you can tell basically, if it's going to be a right fit when you meet the team, right? Like, this is at a minimum 3 to 5 year bet at a minimum. Like, do I really want to show up every quarter and spend time with this person and, make big decisions that impact, not only my life, but like the people that entrusted me with their money and like, all this stuff. And then by the way that we invest, we're like super, super hands-on, particularly early in the investment. I like to say we like we'll work ourselves out of a job. So we'll, a company doesn't really have a great, finance function. All right, like we'll just do it, right? Like, oh, you haven't done an M&A deal before? Okay, we'll just do it, right? Like that kind of thing. So to be spending so much time, I want to know that I'm going to be like with really good people.
Yeah.
And, the right fit is super important. Is this person, only thinking about themselves? Do they really respect investors? Do they understand what that process is and the accountability? Who's actually the boss, right? The people who entrust you with their money, all that kind of stuff. So we look at it through those three lenses, right? Right company, / right deal, right buyer, right? And are we the right fit? Is there a right fit?
No, and Abdul's heard me say this to others. Oftentimes, the real work begins once the deal closes.
Yeah.
For us from a lawyer's perspective, the closing's the end date, but really, for our clients on the buy side, this is the beginning of a partnership. And so that's really cool to hear how intentional you are about making sure you've got the culture, the fit, and, the human element, which, ties back to your story about, certain people giving you those certain opportunities, and, wanting to build, companies that kind of look like where you come from. And so that, it's nice to see how that all ties together and, plays into your investment thesis as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, man. I mean, look, it's also a short life. I've had some really, been very fortunate to have some really successful mentors come along the way. And, they'll tell you, I mean, it's just time is really important and it's a short life. And so I think one of the best, if not the best benefit, and there's a lot of like disadvantages to being an entrepreneur, especially when you're building from scratch. But the best is like you get a point in life where you're just like, I'm just not dealing with anybody I don't want to deal with, right? They're one concept is call it your floor, right? So it's like, here's my floor. Mm-hmm. Anything below that is noise, right? So I frame my life this way. I don't know if people can see that, but like at the bottom, if you can't really play up here, meaning your integrity, meaning, your quality of work, all these other things, like they don't meet your floor. It's like, oh, I'm just going to try to stay with the noise. So I constantly, try to find folks who will, sort of either elevate that frame or, at a minimum be at the floor. And, that starts with just being like good people and having the right intentions and wanting to create real value for yourself and for your families. And then, having everybody else share so they can talk good stuff about you and feel like, he's the man or whatever. So.
I love that. So, Ernie, shifting gears a bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about your level of engagement, civic engagement, beyond deal making, right? So, and I get a lot of this is grounded in growing up in a service oriented household.
Yeah.
You have been connected to public service. You mentioned, of course, for example, your story with J.C. Watts. But can you talk a bit about some of the organizations, initiatives that you're involved in beyond, your day-to-day role as a deal maker?
Yeah.
And also, more importantly, your why.
Yeah.
You could pick.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the why is really important. I mean, so this one is interesting because I think that like, I would say at least about a year and a half ago, there was like a real benefit to screaming out loud about what you did, sort of off the court in a way. And, which is, I think was awesome. And some people were even, sort of intentional enough to be programmatic about that. I think, though, what we've seen really is like, a pullback from that. But I don't think, in terms of the announcements, if you will, around impact, but I don't think that should change no matter what, right? Like, it's like if you've been built for it, you're always gonna be built for it. And I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head in that, I really don't really have any other, way of thinking outside of like supporting people and trying to see folks just be the best they can be.
Yeah.
Right. Like I don't know any other way. And so, I think, the way that reflects itself is, along sort of every journey that I've had, I've always sort of been in a place where I've tried to like just find ways to just build people, right? At HiGro, we like to say, real simple is like, grow people, grow companies, grow communities, right? It's just like if you do that, like it's just that's what happens, right? You got some good companies and good spots, right? And so, I think more specific to your question, well before HiGro, well before any of this stuff, I've always had a passion really for, I don't want to call it the underdog, but just seeing people be supported. What I mean by that, that can be in the day to day, but I'll talk a little bit more about sort of, sort of programmatically, civic and all this other stuff. I think about like the guy that came to Wall Street. He was from a non-core school, had his Southern accent, was a military guy. So I think he probably came in through one of those programs, which I think is credible. I think we need to be doing a lot more of that. And, it was an adjustment, right? It was adjustment. As he was a young associate, it was definitely adjustment. And, there would be times where, we come in and people do these things, and you probably see in the law firm where like people start to really quickly pick who they want to work. And if they're senior and, oh, where'd you go to school? It starts out with that and everything else. It's just natural, right? Or if you grew up and your parents were, vacationing here and you naturally take, it's just kind of natural things. And you didn't have any of that, right? And so I started bringing them in, roping them into some of my work. And occasionally we would, close the door and he's just like, oh, what's up with these people? Like you just gotta say it. Yeah. And, I just had a real passion for him. And, it kind of made me feel great because I would like, all of a sudden my accent would come out a little more, we get like 10 minutes, you know what I mean? And so like, that's how these things play out. So it could be like something as natural and non-programmatic and, kind of unintentional as that. Dude didn't look like me at all, right? You know what I mean? Or something that is much more intentional, programmatic, etc. So when I start thinking about the intentionality and, I've been very consistent. Like my dad was a minister in West Virginia at a time in the, early 80s where across the bridge was another town, out of our state where, after 7 o'clock, like we were told very early on, you just don't ride through there. Like, you know what I mean? It's dark, you don't ride through there. Right. And so that is who I am. That's in my spirit or whatever. And building up people around that concept to know like, hey, there's literally within a mile jog, there are places and people who like you literally cannot be around. But how do you build yourself up? How do you build your spirit up? How do you build your organizations up to where you can overcome that? That has always been the foundation of who I am. And so that has reflected itself in a number of different ways. Civically, I'm on a board of a great organization called Scan Harbor, where it's the largest kind of social organization in I want to say New York City, but definitely East Harlem. Incredible organization. I would, definitely would invite anybody to come, and talk to me. And I've actually gotten some great friends as a result of that. We serve over 26,000 families in a multitude of different ways. I have, and I think it's not necessarily from what I would call sort of political ideology, but I am constantly supporting really good people who think about, I think, the way the world should be and want to see it. So, I like to be able to have impact and call people and say, hey, like, this is an issue. What do you think about that? So we're constantly trying to build community around that. Our church is incredibly intentional. Shout out to Pastor Kevin Johnson, historic church in Harlem, the Abyssinian Baptist Church. at 205 or 10 years old, started from out of protests where, the Ethiopians and black people down in the Lower East Side did not want to sit in the balcony anymore. They wanted to worship like everyone else. They weren't allowed to. They said, hey, I'm going to come up to Harlem. We're going to build our own church. And so there's things like that I've always been sort of taking that on. And, so I'm very, very fortunate for that. I think about my home in West Virginia quite often. I don't think there's, particularly in my area, I think we're okay in the Eastern Panhandle. It's grown and everything else. But, I was there in sort of the middle part of the state, probably 4 or 5 months ago, not enough attention. So I try to think about that. There's only so much that we could do, but I think in terms of time and kids and all the deals and everything else. But civically, I'm constantly thinking about what's happening back home as well.
Yeah, it's amazing, and like you said, this is normal. This is your normal.
Yeah,
there's nothing extra or stretch about this. This is essential to who you are and what you do.
Like oxygen.
Yes, like oxygen. And I've seen you firsthand, and in things that are supportive of communities. And it's great that the audience is, read into a bit of what you do and what you stand for.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think the really cool thing is that, it's funny. We did something the other day, my wife and I, and one of the guests who were there was just like, I don't know how you fit the time in your day or something like that, or where do you get the hours from? But it's all synergistic, right? So I think about, I go back to these models, right? So I did get a chance, when I came on Wall Street to meet Mr. Jordan, Vernon Jordan, and like you think about the impact of what this great man has done, and when you talk about sort of, I never really got close. We're probably 50 something years in different in age variants, but who I am incredibly close with, people like Ray McGuire, who now is president of Lazard, has been, a mentor / turned big brother now. Guys like Charles Phillips, who's just incredible. Guys like Bill Lewis, Bill is like, I can't really say enough. Just solid supporter and demanding, high caliber guys, men who've had way tougher journeys and just excelled, and the way they navigate business, life, children, all of these different things, and continue to just scale and rise to the top has been a path that they just kind of laid out the blueprint. And so, I don't have to, unlike, 20 years ago, like actually now I have or 30 years ago, I have a very clear North Star that is in a way to, when I need something, it's just a text away from guys like that. And so I think that's really sort of, in a really cool way, just helped me move faster, right? And, and they also check, like Bill is the first to be like, like, are you focused? Like that kind of thing. And, I respond like I'm 15, like, oh, yes, sir, like that. And, that's how I was raised. I think that's the way he was raised. And I'm just really blessed to have that substantive guidance. And so when I think about weaving it all together, it becomes really easy. And then things naturally come, right? You sort of attract that. So a great example is we did a refinance on our company data, right? Earlier this year. And, we got a great CEO. I could talk about her forever. She's awesome. But even that, like just hiring a woman CEO, right? Just like, hey, come take a shot, right? So, but that's an aside. But like the capital we attracted, my boy Damian Dwin, built this incredible firm, continues to build this incredible firm 5 years in, called Lafayette Square. He's our partner on that deal, right? And they have programmatic impact. The missions are aligned, right? And so all of a sudden now, like the things that you've been building is just sort of like you actually get, it attracts the law of attraction. You bring this in, Ben and those guys, like, all about impact. I mean, I've never seen someone so intentional, right? And we have fill out forms and all this stuff about how are you helping people, right? This isn't just talk. These are real, things you're building into your financial models. As when you start thinking about your financial model, and waterfalls and all these things, folks care. And so shout out to that team again. They just, so we're just attracting very intentional people, and intentional organizations, and like generating real alpha on the returns, right? So it's been a blessing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've just had some phenomenal mentors, and then over the years have been able to just put together this roster of people that we can lean on, get advice from, help, serve as your North Star. You wanted to kind of build on that and ask, what's some advice you have for, someone who's maybe in your seat 15 years ago, thinking about going deal by deal, thinking about a more entrepreneurial type approach to things, if someone was starting out, or if you could go back and talk to yourself 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What would you tell them? What would you do differently?
Yeah. Big questions. So big questions. I think, and I'm hoping this comes out, closer to Dr. King's birthday. I think context is so important, man. Like, we're about to celebrate 250 years of this country. And, we're about to celebrate Dr. King's birthday. Like, I'm celebrating 10 years of, like, being on my living room table, being like, like with a pen and pad, being like, how am I going to get millions of, like, you know what I mean? Just a dream, literally a dream. And I think with that context, I would share with whoever, is just like, anything is really possible, right? Like, particularly in this country, like you will go through a lot, and as you mature, I'm like, as you say, preaching to myself, you block out the noise, right? Like, don't not expect the ups and downs at all, right? Like, that's gotta happen. Like, it's the only way you get better. It's the only way you build. But just know that, and have faith in, like, the fact that you are positioned in the right place, and there's so much opportunity, even when, like, noise gets in the way, like, just go right through it. And if you were somewhere else where they would have all these, like, weird aristocracies and this and that, but in this country, in a place like New York, where if this billionaire doesn't respect your hustle, you just go to the next one. Like, literally, right? Abdul knows we've done that. And so as he smiles, it's like, all right, you know what I mean? It's like, all right, even that, right? It's like, oh, it's 500 y'all in the city. Like, so next, right? And if you have that approach, I think that over time, anything is possible. What I would probably change a little bit is that, I probably say wouldn't change anything, but I think the thing that I probably would have thought about differently now that I know is just scaling faster, right? And sort of jumping out there faster. I think that, and this is where background's interesting, right? Because, one of my boys, and it's great to have just great friends that are, go beyond just finance a lot, like just think differently. And is a brother. He's like my brother, named Chris Emden. And Chris is an educator. You can look him up. He's awesome, and and really, like, philosopher. And we love our daughters, who are like best friends, and we both love hip hop and all this other stuff. And he always comes with, like, an interesting philosophical approach about things, and also some interesting terminologies, right? And so one of the things he talks about is, they were all at the house, and I was talking about how I, like, go crazy when I see an empty refrigerator. Like, my house, if refrigerator's empty, it's like, and he's like, oh, that's poverty trauma. Right? I'm like, man, like, what is that? He's like, yeah, like, and I was like, I had to think about it. He's like, yeah, that's like, he has this ability, like real professors, right? They name stuff all the time. It's like, yeah, that's like poverty trauma. And I was just sitting there thinking, like, oh my God, like, you're like, I just literally turn into something else. And then, but if I go to, like, Whole Foods, like, I don't mind spending anything on food, and it's full, and I want my kids to see these, like, fruits and vegetables, and it's like my way. But it's like, when it's not there, I'm like, and my wife's like, what are you doing? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, why are you so moody? I'm like, there's nothing in the fridge. And he's like, yeah, that's what that is.
Wow.
And it's a reflection. It takes me back to, I guess, especially in the earlier part of my life, like, in West Virginia, we got like, nothing but a block of government cheese and this, that, all this different things in the fridge. Like, oh, this is, and I didn't really know it or name it. And so that's one, what I would call sort of manifestation, if you will, of that. Another one is, I think, has showed up in business, particularly in early years, and I wasn't able to name it, which is play it safe. Don't mess it up. Incremental is okay, right? As you continue to do, you can vacation here, great. Oh, yeah. As opposed to like, no, you deserve this. You're playing up here, right? And so I think the bumps, just going a little slower than probably just being like, boom. And, I think that's what I would, if looking back, now that I can name these different things over time, it's like, okay, well, what about your position? You've already had the experience, you've got the network, you've got the capital, all this, like, why are you not on a rocket ship? Because you're like, oh, I don't want to mess this great thing up I'm building up. It's like, there's nothing, it's really an easy solve. So that's the one thing I would change. And I think, what we're seeing once we sort of reflected on that as as an entrepreneur and sort of change that, we've been able to like really take, sort of seismic steps, right? To sort of grow up like multipliers in a way. And I think our businesses actually reflect that. It was like, go fast, set bigger goals, we're likely to double the EBITDA of one of our companies this year, right? Even after, and like just from acquisitions, like, so, but before I would have been like, I don't, what happens in the development? It's like, no, like you actually have done the work, you've done the analysis, like what are you holding back on, right? You're already equipped, you got the right talent, just do it. And so I think that's where I think if I was telling myself that I would have learned that lesson years earlier, as opposed to like, well, you got here, you're on Wall Street, there could be another GFC. Like you want to make sure your companies have this just in case, you know what I mean? You don't want to, so that kind of thing.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that profound insight. And generally, thank you for your time today.
Yeah.
With these podcasts, we like to end with a question that gives the audience a bit more insight into who our guest is beyond their professional persona. So in that vein, I want to ask you a very direct question. If you, I'm gonna
cut.
Change I'm gonna change your question a bit. But if you are hosting a dinner, and you have a chance to invite 3 historical figures,
wow,
who would you invite and why?
Oh my gosh, interesting. I think it's funny. I'll say the first 3 that came to mind in real time, but I'm sure if I thought about it, I would change this up. But I think it's so wild. I was like, oh, you got to invite Jesus, just because like I mean, like that's kind of bad. You like kind of like, or like my dad's bitch, like I kind of got to invite him. I don't know how interesting. Like, it'd be interesting, but like here's how wacky my mind is. So then I was like, I guess maybe only because I've referenced Vernon Jordan a couple times. But then my last one that was interesting because I just would like to see how Jesus would play it out would be Napoleon. Oh no, right? Because you got this like interesting dude who's like super aggressive and it's somebody who like. So I don't know if those will really be the 3, but those were the 3 that
That would be fascinating.
It would be fascinating,
right?
Yes.
You know what I
That
mean?
would be, yes.
And he like, are we fighting? Are we calming down? Who's in control? Who's navigating? Who's like, how do you think that happens? Like, what do you think happens at the dinner? Is it like,
because I mean, anything could happen, right? I from what little I know about Napoleon, I'm actually in the middle of a biography about Lafayette.
Yeah.
And there's a whole section on Napoleon, which is pretty interesting. But he was who he was, and he had a really strong sense of history.
Yes.
And what role he wanted to play in history.
Yep.
As I think anyone that generally knows a bit about Napoleon, as he cared a lot about empire, obviously, but also how he was seen
very early on.
Yes.
King of propaganda,
Yeah.
right? You know, he goes to Egypt, comes back, and we won, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, you just, but also like that, just being so headstrong
Yeah.
in the midst of like, so you just got to wonder, like, you know, like, I'm the savior. No, I'm the savior. Like, I don't know, like,
And then exactly. And then you have a historical figure like Vernon Jordan, incredible sense of, you know, journey and service and all that. So just that dynamic. And then, you know, the third historical figure you mentioned, who depending on where you land in terms of how you view history, you know, had a strong view of himself as well.
Yeah,
to say the least.
Literally, to say the least. So I don't know. It'd be.
That's fascinating.
I'd just be like, I don't know if I'd like want to stay there and I'd be like, yo, y'all just crazy. I gotta go. Like,
leave them.
I was like,
Leave them at the destination.
Yeah.
Wherever the.
But I think that would be a fascinating dinner. Like, you know, like, you're like, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Ernie, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It's a great conversation.
Great conversation. Dan and I are super appreciative of you carving out some time, especially given everything you have going on.
Yeah.
So we're just, you know, really grateful, and I know that the audience will find a lot of inspiration and knowledge from the words you've shared with us today.
Yeah. Nah, dude. Thank you. I mean, thank you. Thanks, McGuireWoods. Great help earlier this year. You know, just get to live the dream, man. Like, I think, you know, we go back to, you know, 20 years ago, and, you know, people don't veer off path too much. And that's what I've learned over time. So we, you know, just sitting here, you know, 20 years later, it's almost something like that.
Yes.
Boys, you know, from the hustle.
Yeah.
You know, I it's almost funny. I should shut this up, but like there is something there about the law school at Howard. It's just like the family, and you know, hopefully folks got to, you know, not include you into the.
That's all right.
No, but it's just amazing, and so, you know, I think for anybody who, you know, enjoys this and you know, wants to connect or took something out, like, you know, they should definitely, you know, hit me up on LinkedIn or do whatever. But I think this has just been awesome. And, you know, again, context for like just being here is powerful. So, so we're real excited, and, you know, we don't do these students too often, but, it feels good when we have time to do it. So it's been great.
Awesome.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Accessing the Pipeline. To learn more about today's discussion, please email bpef@mcguirewoods.com. We look forward to hearing from you. This series was recorded and is being made available by McGuireWoods for informational purposes only. By accessing this series, you acknowledge that McGuireWoods makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this installment. The views, information, or opinions expressed are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of McGuireWoods. This series should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice from a licensed professional attorney in your state and should not be construed as an offer to make or consider any investment or course of action.